You are listening to Climate Tech Stories and the Average Joe. Come get excited about the incredible work going on to protect and preserve our planet. And listen to the human stories behind the climate tech movement. Each episode, Joe McDonald, founder of TIM, the Renewable Energy Marketplace, talks with leaders, investors, generators, and businesses who are putting their heart and soul into creating a positive future for all of us.
Right, well, welcome back to Climate Tech Stories and the Average Joe. It's a podcast where we get to know a little bit more about the stories and people behind businesses that are making a positive impact on the planet. I'm Joe, and I'm super excited to be joined by Johnny Wake, the managing partner at Courteenhall Estate. Johnny was a fully qualified GP, and since 2013, he's pretty much grown the business in every direction. Just to give you an example of the diversity now of a rural estate farm, Courteenhall is involved in regenerative agriculture, commercial letting, there's angel investing, there's local community partnerships, event businesses, and many more. So probably best to just welcome Johnny. And first of all, have I missed anything off that list that you'd like to add that you're involved with at the moment?
Only if you're going to get married, Joe. We do weddings and events, which we're very, very happy to host you, and a bit of renewable energy, which I'm sure we'll end up talking about. So yeah, that just about covers it. I didn't know you were calling this the Average Joe. I see what you did there. That's really clever.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to take any credit for that. It pretty much exemplifies why I'm the average Joe. I've got a great team. And actually, on your renewable portfolio, I mean, I have to look down for this, but it's 2 solar thermal arrays, 2 wind turbines, 9 rooftop PVs, 15 ground source heat pumps. Is there anything I've missed?
16 ground source heat pumps, and some. I think we've got 4 air source heat pumps as well.
Wow. I mean, that is amazing. And look, I'd love to get into that detail, but I think just to zoom back out for the audience as well, could you just give us a little bit of the history of Courteenhall and I guess the role that you're playing now and the mission that you kind of work on day to day?
Sure. So we're based right on the south side of Northampton, on the border of Northampton now, which makes me feel old. We're farming on the urban fringe. We're first and foremost an agricultural business, but we're very diversified, as you've heard already. We're doing quite a few different things. My family have farmed here for 351 years, so we've been here for a long old time. That clearly informs the way that we look at the world and the way we look at our business. So we talk about sustainability like an awful lot of other people, a lot of other businesses, and a lot of the farms do. But sustainability for us is not an end in itself. And you have to know why you're going to be sustainable. And for us, we've got a mission statement that's leaving a legacy to be proud of. And that word legacy is our reason to bother being sustainable. We really want to leave something behind that we can show off about. And I say that anyone who has anything to do with Courteenhall, I want them to be able to imagine taking their grandchildren of now or the future around the place and saying, yeah, I was part of that. And so that informs everything that we do.
You mentioned sustainability as a kind of a value, but in specifically like the sustainability we talk about today, perhaps environmental sustainability, is this something that has always been an emphasis and sort of handed down, or is this a more recent push for the estate to really look at things like your biodiversity, regenerative agriculture, and investment into renewables?
I think it's both, because clearly, if you have a long-term view, as any family farm of any size or type will do, then you feel a responsibility to those who came before you and those who came after you. And so those who came before me were clearly thinking in a long-term way in terms of looking after the land. But inevitably, we've changed things. We've got new views. We've got new dynamism, I hope, in terms of how we're addressing that. Environmental sustainability is just one of the 3 types of sustainability that we focused on. There's financial sustainability as well, because if we can't make the bottom line work, then clearly we'll cease to exist. And the third one is community sustainability. And we feel it's really, really important that we actually have a part within the local community. We're not some kind of island. Otherwise, we sort of cease to exist in a different way as well.
I think it would be great to come back to the community side of things, but focusing on you to take over that legacy and to make decisions that would impact that. What kind of pressure did that put on you? What was the transition like when you moved from being the fully qualified GP to sort of now day-to-day managing the actual estate itself?
I wanted to be a doctor. I was going to be at least 4 days a week doctor, and someone was going to manage the business. That's how my dad had done it. unfortunately, when I took over, we didn't really have a full manager in place, and I ended up getting dragged more and more into the business through necessity, but also it got more and more under my skin. I ended up doing less and less doctoring slowly over a period of years, to the point where I was actually doing very little. And I had a year of doing no doctoring before I had to hand in my license, which was a bit of a painful thing to do. I always get asked, do I miss it? And my answer is always, I miss being fully qualified in what I do rather than making it up as I go along. But I still really enjoy what I do now. I don't have any regrets. It feels like a waste of training, but there are an awful lot of overlaps that people don't tend to see. The biggest one being people. It's still all about people.
And you made the decision then that it would come down to you having to be the one that steps in to run that, than finding someone else that could run the business in that kind of managing role?
So before I took over, my dad and our old manager had a drive to try and recruit a new manager, and they didn't really manage to find anyone to do that. We're an annoying kind of size. We're a middle size kind of place, and so it's difficult to. The market's pretty small. It's difficult to find someone. Is the short version of that. So I ended up getting sucked in. There are definitely ways that if I was to go back to doctoring, that I could manage this out. But of course, it's a bit like your business, I guess. It's your baby, and giving your child to someone else is a very, very difficult thing to do, especially now. I've had about 9 years of running it myself.
I think, yeah, I can understand to a degree, but what I just can't get my head around is the pressure of being like a CEO, founder for something that's so new, is that in a way, the sunk cost fallacy doesn't exist, where you're like, I can take risks. I can take risks here because what have I got to lose? And I've worked on it for a year. I don't know. And I'm so interested to see when you've made decisions around projects that you've decided to invest in or bring into the farm and estate, when you've got hundreds of years of history attached to that, especially when you talk about things like financial sustainability and making sure that it can still be around for hundreds of years to come. I'm just so interested to understand what the decision-making process must be like for you, and how you consider what to do and when to do it. Because it must be somewhat different to me setting up a business. This is a tech startup.
Yeah, it probably boils down to one sort of word, which is long-termism. Not just because we've been here for a long time, and not just because we plan to be here for another 350 odd years, but every decision that we make is through a really long-term lens. So it's probably through, on average, roughly a 100-year lens. Imagine planting a tree, for example, is going to be somewhere between 80 and 400 years in terms of a project, and tree planting is a very good analogy of the kind of activities that we're doing. So it's just a really, really long-term lens with your decisions. In some ways, that's really frustrating because it's like turning an oil tanker on a mega scale. On others, it's really satisfying because you make decisions that are the right decisions because they're long-term decisions.
Is that a decision that's sort of made by yourself, or is it a team that really helps you? How do you get the expertise that you need to help inform the type of projects that you bring in and the type of businesses that you set up within the estate?
So our main business structure is a partnership, which I know is slightly unusual these days, but it's quite common in the agricultural world. And we have an executive team who are very, very involved in helping make both the day-to-day and the strategic decisions. And because we're a partnership, we don't actually have an official board, but we have an unofficial board who are there to advise us both on strategic and specific issues where they have expertise. And that kind of combination seems to work really well for us. It's taken us a while to get the hang of it, but there's a freedom involved in being a partnership and not a limited company. But we've ended up actually kind of mimicking a lot of the structure that you'd see in a classic company.
And it seems like you're involved, I think you've taken Courteenhall into a countryside stewardship scheme. You're involved or chair of other sort of groups. Obviously, there's a lot of partnerships in place. In a way, is there like cross-pollination in terms of like ideas and validation and learning from other either estates or farms that you're connected to?
Definitely. And I think as an industry, the agriculture industry is really rubbish at cross-pollination. It's very much sort of you pull the drawbridge up and you think of your neighbour as your competitor, which of course is absolute rubbish. We're all competing on a world market, and we are getting a lot better now finally at sharing. But I found it really shocking coming into the industry from a different industry where collaboration was the order of the day, how unnaturally it comes to farmers in this country. Whereas if you go across to the continent, for example, farms tend to be much smaller, and they had to cooperate. It's in the culture already. They share grain storage and all that kind of thing. So it's a very, very different atmosphere, but we're getting a lot better. And certainly for me, as someone who came to the industry late, didn't have any training in it, learning from others is absolutely key. And there's loads of different sources for that.
was about to ask, what was like the biggest change from moving from GP 4 days a week to running and building a business, or continuing to run and build an existing business?
There were so many. I had no business training. I had no agricultural training. I was grossly underqualified to do it. I suppose if I wanted to try and pick out one big change, it's the change of mindset. When you're a doctor, your sole mission is to try and help people as far as you reasonably can. And so you always just about always feel like you're on their side. It was definitely a change of mindset when you go into, say, business negotiations, of trying to think, well, actually, I'm not trying to just help this person. I'm hopefully trying to find a way of being symbiotic with them, but potentially, actually, it's not. It may be a zero-sum game. So that's been a certain learning curve for me.
Interesting. I think, I to a degree, I see it in the startup culture as well. I think a lot of startups and founders, and I've been fully victim to this and still am, but see every other startup in their space as a competitor. And actually, in a lot of cases, you're 0.01% and they're 0.01%. And actually, you're competing against a completely different form of competition, which in your case, it sounds like is the wider market. It's very similar, but there's still such a lack of sometimes collaboration between those founders. So I find we get a lot of learning from founders of other companies and other industries, which is great. But there is definitely a missing piece of that puzzle as well in that startup landscape, which I hadn't really thought about until you mentioned it.
Well, I think that's really hard, isn't it? Because in my world, clearly there are lobbying groups, representative groups for us, which we can lean on to give expertise and to coordinate that collaboration. For startups, you kind of got the UK BAA, haven't you? But there's not an easy and obvious way to pull them all together, because by their very nature, they're scattered and loose and not very registered and established.
Yeah, and when you then look in the space, but especially we operate in energy, the lobbying and the power of incumbents is just enormous. And so unless there is a better way of collaborating, it's almost impossible to get your voice heard or to make change in the more traditional ways other than just being disruptive. But I wonder, from your standpoint, is there an area where you've got most inspiration from for the decisions you've made with the estate? Is there another business, a source of inspiration, learning that you've come back to time and time again?
There are lots, but if I could pick one out, it's probably two of the courses that I've done, which have been game changers. And I think probably the best piece of advice I ever had was to stop just trying to make the business work and actually force yourself to take a step back and go on a training course to get that perspective and that outside expertise. And that the perspective that gave me was absolutely immense. And also the network. And certainly learning that networking, I mean, I hate the cheesy phrase networking, but building up contacts who have expertise both within and without my industry has just been immense. And I've come across so many really generous people with their time and their expertise who I owe a heck of a lot to.
Where do you find you're spending most of your time on today when you think about all the different businesses and the running and the operations, the day-to-day of a managing partner? Like, what is your day-to-day looking like on average?
I have tried to map that, and it's difficult because every day really truly is different. And I guess a lot of people say that, but the variety is enormous. And I love that. I'm definitely a kind of jack of all trades, master of none kind of person. So that suits me, though it is sometimes quite challenging to manage. But it's very, very variable. Sometimes I can be getting my hands dirty on the farm, though the guys would laugh at me saying that, because in comparison to them, obviously it's very little. My hands are pretty soft. And other times I'll be in some very, very random meetings to do with charities that we're helping, or to do with something completely off the wall. And generally our approach has been a kind of scattergun approach to diversification. We'll look at 20 different things just to be able to pursue one that actually looks like it's going to work in the end, so that you go down some really wild rabbit holes by doing that.
Is that something, is there an element of that test and learn you're comfortable doing, as in you trial lots of things, it's okay to fail, and before you pick the one that you're going to sort of fully double down on? Is that something that works well, I guess, when you're slightly less constrained in terms of potentially like shareholders and boards and decision-making processes?
Yeah, well, we have immense freedom to pursue them, which is great. But there is also a danger that you end up putting a lot of time and resource into that rather than just focusing on doing the things you do well. And we have certainly been guilty. I've certainly been guilty of spreading the business thin by trying to do too many things rather than that focus. And also, there's a real danger of FOMO. I think probably the reason I started out with that tactic of trying 20 different things just to get one working was because I was terrified that I might miss an opportunity for the business to grow somewhere. And sometimes you just need to be satisfied and just focus on the day stuff.
I will ask about a good experience, but the audience knows, especially the other founders out there, know about failure and learning from that. Is there an example of sort of a failure you've gone through since sort of inheriting and taking over this role? And was there any learnings that came out of it?
Oh God, there's been loads of day-to-day failures and strategic failures as well. I guess with just about any business, and certainly with my business, everything comes down to people. And as a GP with background GP, you think you're incredibly well trained in communication because it's an absolutely key part of your training. It's hammered home so much, so often. And yet I found, okay, I was very good at some types of communication, but I really wasn't good at others. And I was probably really slow to realize that. And that meant that I wasn't getting the best out of some of the people on our team. And I don't know if I think I've improved. Have I got to the final destination yet? Probably not, because you probably never get there. But yeah, I had some spectacular failures trying to work with people, some of whom were probably the wrong fit, and I hung on to them for way too long when we all should have just said that we need to say thanks, shake hands, and walk away. And other times actually really not tapping into people and helping them get the best out of themselves.
Again, I guess it's a little interesting with such a diverse portfolio of businesses. That also means then it's quite a diverse group of people. And like, how do you think about performance, right? Because we even struggled when we look at, the difference between an engineering team, a marketing team, and the commercial team. We have one single North Star and we've got one focus, right? A platform that allows businesses to buy their energy more directly from renewable generators. With you, how do you focus those teams towards a common goal? And also, how do you manage performance and manage the right people for the right jobs?
It's really hard, and KPIs are very challenging. Most of the parts of our business, you can't really set KPIs. You can set objectives, but it's quite hard to smart them. It's very hard to give people performance-related bonuses in most of the parts of our business. Quite a few people in the team will wear more than one hat as well, so that they're effectively doing 2 or 3 jobs, which are relatively separate. So it's really challenging, and it's not something we've probably got nailed down, but we just continually try and do our best and muddle through with it.
And I did promise I'll ask also about the thing that you're really excited about at the moment, or a project you're working on that you're really excited about at the moment. What's going right for you at the moment? Yeah, what thing is getting you up in the morning with a smile on your face?
We've got a few things that are getting me really excited, probably too many, because again, we're probably trying to spread ourselves really thin. I'll probably put carbon at the top of the list at the moment. Some of your listeners may have heard that carbon in agriculture is an area of real interest at the moment. The more carbon you can store in your soil, the healthier your soil is. So we as farmers should always be doing that. And we have been measuring that here in terms of organic matter for quite a number of years now. And we've got good levels of organic matter, good levels of carbon. But the question is, how can we increase that? And how can we also make that work for us beyond just improving our soils? So we're doing, as many other businesses are, we're doing detailed measurement of our carbon footprint. There are carbon measuring tools out there for soil at the moment, but they're incredibly inaccurate and rough and ready. So we've now gone with an incredibly detailed one, which is becoming a government accredited. It's peer reviewed by an accredited university. It's really expensive, and we're working on that to give us a complete carbon footprint of the whole business and not just the farm. And we believe we hope that we will actually be sequestering carbon overall when we take everything into account. So long as we can prove that, or beyond reasonable doubt, then that will give us the chance to actually trade carbon. And that would be a very exciting way to help monetize what we're doing. And there are other carbon projects that we're working on as well with the help of some other companies, or represented NGOs actually rather than companies. So, for example, we're taking part in the hedgerow carbon code pilot trial. There's a carbon code for trees. There isn't one for hedgerows, and hedgerows are great carbon sinks, really good for carbon as well as obviously for biodiversity. So we're getting really excited about carbon at the moment. And I'm also thinking that the political climate is now finally changing as regards renewables. We've done probably the majority of what we can do from a solar point of view, but there's definitely potential for us to do more wind if onshore wind gets allowed back in. and we're just working with a partner on an AD, anaerobic digestion application for planning at the moment. And AD, I think, has a real part to play in our national energy challenge, shall we say?
Yeah, I feel it's awfully underrepresented when it's talked about, because the problem we have with wind and solar, the cleanest source, but obviously the intermittency, and therefore we're left pretty much looking at only nuclear and gas as a baseload alternative without coal.
Yeah.
Coal is very good at what it does. Anaerobic digestion being that sort of consistent baseload production, as well as the kind of circular economy it brings in. It's like a real shame. There was a big, I guess, push for during the FIT and ROC schemes where ADs popped up, but we really don't see that many anymore compared to solar panels, battery sites. I don't know if you're seeing that changing or why you would see that.
Well, there is a change now, because there are two new subsidies that come in to encourage it. They're nowhere near as generous as the previous ones, but the higher price of energy combined with those new ones is now making people look at it again very seriously. And if you can find an on-site use for the waste heat and some electricity, then that obviously gives you an extra justification for doing it. I think the key thing with AD, though, is whatever you're feeding it has to be a sustainable source, whatever you want to. Obviously, there's a whole debate around what counts as sustainable, but there have been some problems in the past. I'm sure you're aware, with things like maize being grown for it. And my personal feeling is that is probably a problem. You need to make sure what's going in is true waste, or at least a decent enough proportion of it is.
No, absolutely. It's interesting hearing you talk about both of these. That impact of thinking with long-termism is so helpful here, because I think you're probably aware in the carbon space, carbon trading, carbon credits, carbon accounting, measuring the detail and being absolutely sure and being really vertically deep within the company, and therefore higher cost, is absolutely necessary to make these things worthwhile. Otherwise, obviously, there's a huge sort of risk of greenwashing, which we've seen in other certifications. So it's interesting to see you're taking the long-termism route, which is probably a more expensive one, but provides a long-term future for this. It's not a quick buck over the next few years. And
you're spot on. And actually, I should have used the greenwashing word, because that is just absolutely key in this whole space anyway. And you're right that because we take a long-term view, reputational damage to us is a killer. So it can take us decades to build up that reputation, but a day to lose it. So we need to be really, really careful about that.
And just to touch on, you mentioned right at the beginning your community work. What do you see the advantages are for you to be working with the community and partnering with the community? You talked about not creating an island, but talk me through the why and the how that you actually work with your local community at the moment.
So I find it hard to put into words, really, but if we don't engage with our local community, I just sort of think the point of what we do disappears. We have to be a really focal point for the community. We always have been in the past, and we have to not only avoid losing that, but we have to actually build on it. We've been doing a particular amount of work with schools, and I think that's really important, not only because of the cheesy phrase, the children are our future, which they clearly are, but also I think there's an increasing divide between urban and rural. And as a farm on the urban fringe, we see that, and it really, really worries me. And so we need to do our bit with that. And there's also a well-documented disconnection between people and their food. And we've had kids from urban schools come here, and all the cliches, they've never seen any kind of animal that's to do with food before. They can't believe an egg comes out of a chicken's bum. It's absolutely mind-blowing when you actually see these things for real, and then you see the buzz that these kids are getting out of it, and the massive change in their mindset at the end. So I think that's why it's really important to us.
Yeah, I think, well, in fact, I'm sure many industries can learn from that. I always find it funny, before I even got into energy, I'm sure I was taught it at school, maybe I wasn't just paying attention, but I didn't know when you flick a light switch, I had no understanding of how that light bulb was turning on. I just took it for granted. And it either takes an energy crisis or education to actually understand the importance of understanding even where your energy comes from, how it's produced, whether it's local or not, why you want to build certain renewable assets, why you might want to decarbonize. There's synergies there in the same way. I imagine it's exactly the same for knowing where your produce comes from, where your food comes from. I'm sure at some point, even things like water will become more and more about the origin as the story, as well as the importance of educating around that.
Yeah, your light switch analogy is a really good one. And you're also absolutely spot on in terms of the crisis. I think everyone has started to care a lot more about their energy because we've had a sort of crisis with energy, but it's not the kind of crisis where there's been a blackout yet.
No.
And food production is very similar. We've obviously during COVID and more recently, we have had food shortages. And that's kind of frightening for people, but they're not proper food shortages. When we actually have blackouts or true food shortages, then everyone's going to care a hell of a lot more about how those things are produced for them.
Absolutely. Right. We're going to do 2 quick fire questions. So first one is, what piece of technology have you been using recently that, you couldn't live without, that you've been really enjoying? Other than the Bluetooth headset that you very...
Well, it's funny you say that. I'm really sad about a Bluetooth headset. I can't put my phone to my head these days. It's kind of pathetic. But it just feels really like a real effort to have to lift my arm up to hold the phone there. So when I do my phone calls, I'm so lucky where I work. I just walk outside with my dogs to walk them whenever I'm making a phone call. And I get a very cold hand for 6 months of the year if I'm not using my Bluetooth headset. So I really love that piece of tech. And I've got about 3 of them because I keep losing them and then refinding them.
I think that's a good enough answer. And do you have a song or a podcast on repeat at the moment that you're enjoying?
Oh, podcasts. I'm a huge podcast fan. I don't want to single out one, but I really enjoy The Rest is History, The Rest is Politics, and Rugby Union Weekly are probably my three top ones.
Well, there you go. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Johnny, for joining us. Just to let people know, I did check. I'm not pushing this, but I did see you can buy a book on the history of Courteenhall Farm on your website. But, is there any other way that people can reach out to you if they want to find out more about Courteenhall, yourself, and the future plans?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we're on all the social media channels that you'd expect, and there's the website as well. So yeah, give us a shout. It'd be lovely to hear from anybody.
Amazing. Yeah, our marketing team have already said that your social is a very good beacon for us even to follow. So yeah, do check out Courteenhall Farm socials. They're fantastic. Amazing. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll speak again soon, hopefully.
Thanks, Joe.
Take care.
Bye.
So yeah, how are you doing, Jace?
Good. Yeah, very good. I am excited about our second podcast. You would have seen that we've got some jazzy t-shirts, matching t-shirts. We've even got, how sad is this? We've got matching watches, not intentionally, but the t-shirts are. Yeah, I'm good, mate. Yeah, really good. Looking forward to this. I think it's been really interesting, isn't it? Listening back to the podcast. And yeah, as you would have listened already, farming is just so interesting, isn't it? Like, what was it like interviewing?
It was so interesting. I was actually really excited, especially with Johnny, because obviously I've spoken to people who are in business and starting businesses, but their long-termism, like in terms of how far he has to think for decisions, whilst also still taking kind of risks to, actually take advantage of opportunities to keep diversifying. I was so interested in terms of the mindset and how different it might be to a founder. But it really wasn't. Obviously, just super humble, admitted his failures, talks about how he tests and learns, talks how he takes opportunities, but definitely has a much longer term view than maybe you would have, with a 24-month runway as a company. So, it was fascinating. What a lovely guy as well.
Yeah, he is a great bloke. I had the privilege last year. I popped onto the estate. I think you remember I popped down there in Northampton, and to see the team and just see physically some of the stuff that you were chatting about. And yeah, not only is it an ancient estate, but he's so relevant, modern, applicable right now. Yeah, good bloke. Thanks, Johnny. And I think we might be invited back to see the estate. So yeah, we'll put this out and we'll get that invitation.
One of the few small benefits of being a startup founder. So yeah, since we last spoke, I was just interested if you'd seen anything at the moment that's entertained you or inspired you or frustrated you in the energy space.
Yeah, really interesting. Like, now that we're up and we're running and we've got more customers and growing, like all of my mates are like, oh, love to chat and energy's buzz. And April 1st came and I got an email from my electricity supplier, Shell, and then a few other mates who were with Octopus were like, hey, how does this compare? And when I actually looked at it, and I don't normally look at this stuff, but I guess I should because I'm now working and running, or part running, Tem Energy. And it was really eye-watering. Basically, I opened up my renewal quote for this coming year, and my standing charges, which are the D&O charges, which are standard, metering costs, etc. But actually the power price, so the power that I'm paying for my electricity, was 51p a kilowatt hour. Then my buddies were paying 48, 45p, I think, with Octopus and then a couple of others. And to put that into perspective, wholesale energy was trading at that day at around 14 to 15p a kilowatt hour. And I was like, whoa, this can't be right. And spoke to you, spoke to a few other people, and that's exactly what was happening. I was really pissed off and quite shocked, I think. Whilst we've got some government support to take us into this next winter, man, at like 51p and a wholesale price of 14p, yeah, and plus profit and costs and all of that and all the stuff that goes into an electricity bill, it was like, wow, there's a lot of fat in that. So that was the biggest thing I've seen that's affected me and obviously millions and millions of people.
It's interesting because obviously in the retail space, it's not somewhere we operate, but there are strong governance from Ofgem to a degree in terms of trying to protect the consumer. But ultimately, when it comes to wholesale commodity trading, these decisions are being made by big trading firms. I imagine, as probably people have seen over the last few months, all of the oil companies talking about record profits.
Yeah.
Yes, that's linked to gas prices, but it's also linked to their positions on electricity.
Yeah.
So thankfully, some businesses now are actually able to get contracts way lower than the actual energy price cap, which is fantastic. But a lot of retail consumers are simply stuck with actually really high pricing.
Yeah, and also, you know, there's been a big thing around metering as well. So prepaid meters, and it's really hard. Like, yes, this is retail, and we're not doing retail, and I don't think we'll ever will, but maybe we will. I don't know. But actually, you know, when you're having a prepaid meter and you're paying for that, the limitations on that. So that is, I don't normally get frustrated about this stuff, but I think particularly when you've got friends who are seeing the effect and we're in, you know, the detail of it, that's been the big thing for this last month.
Yeah, to me, all of this just has to catalyse towards every individual person realising there is a big problem here.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see so many new companies come into that space, especially the retail space, similar to what we've seen in fintech, and just try and offer the customers better deals and better ways of doing things, because it just can't continue to exist, especially when everyone now is becoming aware of what is going on in terms of the mismatch between you ending up with very high prices and no control and no options, really. Every supplier is offering a relatively similar price. Every supplier is offering 100% renewable. What does that even mean anymore? And yet we know there's a huge difference between what effectively you're paying when you're buying that wholesale power from the market and yet what the end user actually get. To me, being the, I guess, ever optimist, I see that as like obviously a huge opportunity for this transition, because without everyone becoming aware and getting frustrated and getting annoyed like you, no one wants to care about their energy. No one wants to be dealing with it. It's overly complicated. It's exactly the same sort of things that was going on in the financial institutions. They make it seem complicated. They create barriers to entry. They make, oh, don't worry about it. We'll manage it for you. We're doing the best job we can. We're on the side of the customer. But the incentives just aren't aligned. I see that definitely changing. The question, I guess, is when. And the issue now is you get new retailers trying to come into the space. But it wasn't long ago that 10 retail companies went bust. So I think there'll be a fear as well of new startups in
Definitely.
that space,
Yeah.
despite whatever actually they
Yeah.
might be set up to actually manage
Yeah.
risk way, way better. And that just gives enough the current traditionals to continue probably growing and taking market share and not allowing for new
Definitely.
entries to come in. So
And also sort of service as well. Some of those new entrants already, you can see the service, the level of automation, the resulting service that you get as a customer is so different. And so, yeah, let's hope that some breakthrough and actually more people actually, wake up and smell the coffee and go, do you know what, there are some other options on the table that, one, are more cost effective, but also you have a better experience.
yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah. That's my moan for this month.
Well, you're just fighting on behalf of the people now, aren't you, Jace?
Yes.
That's
Man of the people.
a true must. Top tips then. So for me, looking at business reflection this month, I've actually done a LinkedIn post on this as well, but I've just become really intrigued in terms of how much work should a founder be doing. Because I find it very difficult to ever switch off and not think about work. So it makes me feel like I'm doing 80, 90-hour weeks. But when I actually sat down and sort of document the quality hours I'm actually spending working, it's maybe like 5 hours a day. You add up 5 hours of quality work a week, maybe 6-day weeks, right? You're talking about maybe 30 hours. But every founder talks about working 80-hour weeks, being put to the grind, always tired, always working.
Yeah.
And I just started to sort of try and work through, like, what of that is exaggeration, BS? What of it is actually feeling like you're working because you're consistently thinking? And what of it is actually maybe my own inefficiencies in execution, etc. But I was reading a lot and not necessarily the idle for me, but actually hearing someone like Jeff Bezos say something like, actually your job as a leader is to make a few number of very quality decisions. It's actually made me realize that as long as I can clear space for those few hours of quality work, they can be quality decisions, rather than filling my whole day with just busy tasks, feeling like I'm busy, trying to move forward, but actually not actually getting down to those quality core decisions, even if that means building up this backlog and guilt and frustration and expectation management. You obviously give me some good advice and work well with me in order to try and get the best out of both of us when we're in that really intense situation when there's 10 things to do and we know we can only do 2 or 3 of them. But I don't know how you found work-life balance over the last few months, especially as things have started to heat up at 10.
I think Mrs. Stocks, my lovely wife, would probably say I've not quite got it right. And I haven't. I tell you one thing I have learnt, and I'm reading at the moment, is James Clear's book on atomic habits.
Oh, yeah.
And really, really worth a read and a good podcast. And he, I think, distills some of what you're talking about. Do you know what? It's not about this BS, founder, I'm working 18, 20-hour days, look at me. It's actually taking a step back and going, what are the habits that I can form to concentrate for periods of time and make really clear, good decisions and intelligent, smart decisions, rather than in the busyness and the reaction of life, actually to take a step back. And I haven't got it right, but actually, if I do take some time out of the day, and whether it's going for a run or going for a swim, and then pausing afterwards and applying some of those principles, like some of the decisions we've made in the last month, I go, wow, do you know what? That's a much cleaner pathway that is going to create a lot less confusion, a lot more organisation for other people in the business. So he's really cool. I'm only halfway through his book. And I think that's probably my biggest learning, last month. And I think for me personally, just genuinely prioritising sleeping well and exercising. Those are 2 really important cogs for me, along with my own faith and having some time to reflect. Those are the big rocks in my day, I think.
Because it's interesting that when you think about how quickly a startup moves and how an hour now, what that will mean when it compounds in 2 years' time, if your startup is successful, it's incredibly attractive to assume you just need to do more hours.
Yeah.
Because an hour now can generate 100x potentially in the hours and impact, rather than deferring that. But I guess it's the cliche, like actually quality is better
Yeah.
than quantity, and we're starting to see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and
And it sets a culture, I think, for the business as well.
Yeah.
We want people to care and know the direct impact of what they're trying to build here at Temp.
Yeah.
But if we set the standard that can only be built at 18 hours a day, no, to win, especially in our space, you need to think really smart.
Yeah. And I think even chatting to some of the developers, I guess maybe even 5 years ago, but 10 years ago, how many lines of code have you written today?
Yeah.
How many customers have you spoken to today? Well, actually now it's, hey, what quality work am I applying to my coding, my writing? What type of customers am I speaking to? And what quality conversations I'm having? The outturn and the fruitfulness of that is so much more. Yeah. We're still learning this, but oh, hello. There is a little dog down here, or a big dog. Are you going to come and say hello? Not on the sofa. What? This is a new sofa.
So this also helps, I have to say, in terms of the decompression a little bit. Anyway, well, we've, I think, been told by our manager here that we're probably time to close off the podcast. But as always, lovely to catch up with you again.
Good, mate. Good to see you.
Yeah, and we'll be catching up with the rest of you in a month's time.
See you soon.
Take care.